From the beginning, a certain spirit began to grow among those who chose to stay. It was a spirit of survival tied to family and to education.
These weren't just frontiersmen that came, these were families. So there were a lot of children. Early on, the need for education was identified.
It's interesting that as soon as they set up their wagon boxes, they began school. And school started in those wagon boxes, even before a home was built in this valley. So education was always key to life here.
Charles Dickens was writing about the Mormons that were getting converted and leaving England and coming on a ship. And he said, these people, these Mormons, are the best educated poor people, basically, in England.
And then as time went forward, just as today, the need for further education was apparent. So schools came about for high school and then also the St. George Academy.
One of the things that saved and why it worked here, why people didn't just give up on the Cotton Mission and Dixie, was because there were public works jobs. So the tabernacle first, followed by, in 1871, by the temple, they got more organized.
They'd had practice, obviously, cooperating as communities and building large projects. They'd built the tabernacle and the temple, they'd built the courthouse, and so there was this process of joining together as a community and cooperating and building these public buildings was already pretty well established by the time they took on the new college building.
One of the great Dixie stories is the odyssey of a young man named Nell Sanderson. In 1908, which was just a few years before the St. George and then Dixie Academy came into being, a teenage hobo from Chicago got kicked off a train near Clover Valley, Nevada. He was coming west with the idea that he was going to try to find his way to Panama because they were building a canal down there. When he was kicked off the train, eventually he made his way to St. George, where he then became a student at Dixie Academy. And what he discovered with the help and support of community members is that he was a scholar. And by the time he was finished here at Dixie, he was voted the student most likely to become president of the United States. He went on from here to New York University, Chicago University. He earned a doctorate in the early days of sociology. In fact, he's known as one of the founders of that discipline. In the meantime, he had gone to France and fought in World War I, survived the killing fields of France. By the time the Depression hit, he was well known in the area of sociology, and he became a protege and a kind of a lieutenant to Harry Hopkins, who was Franklin Roosevelt's key person in creating the New Deal. And so there he found himself very close to the Oval Office, probably as close to the Oval Office as anyone from this town had ever come at that point. It's just a wonderful example of how someone who was kicked off a train in a valley nearby came to Dixie. His life was changed. He went on and realized his potential.
Well, this was a very small school, a few hundred students. There was a period of time that there was no funding available, and that was a time of great sacrifice for the faculty. And for a year or two, there were some of these faculty members that they didn't get any salary from the school.
They kept the school alive, kept classes going during those 2 years by the barter system.
Oh, we came here from a farm down in Bloomington. We're flaming youth. We've come for some education. We brought our wood to pay our tuition, and we're going to stay, so there.
As students would come to go to college, their family might bring a beef, or they might bring some chickens that would cover the tuition. Or maybe they gave the lumber from the tree that they cut down.
You just think about how difficult that would have been to suddenly have no salary, not knowing for sure if the state's going to fund it.
So that there again, it's that ingenuity, that innovation, that we can do this, we'll figure this out, we'll keep this institution alive. In 1950, the Dixie Education Association raised the money to build the Dixiana dorms, and that became the first formal dormitory for women. And that process, again, was completely community inspired and community funded.
When I came down for my interview, they were building the Dixiana, which is a girls' dorm, which they didn't have any place for girls. And when I went to see the president, he was up on the roof driving nails, putting the roof on the Dixiana. And all the teachers were there working, didn't get paid one dime, and all the teachers on the faculty were there building the Dixiana so we'd have a place for girls to stay. Yeah, it was a unified thing by the community that saved this school.
Later in the 50s, when the state was looking at closing down colleges like Dixie in the state, the fact that the community had built that Dixiana dorm was one of the factors that played into the governor and the legislature realizing that, hey, this community cares about this community has ownership, this community is passionate. They will keep this institution moving forward. And so once again, it went through a difficult time where it could have just as easily gone away. There were, during those tenuous years, different challenges, and a lot of it had to do with funding, but a lot of it had to do with having a critical mass of students for the institution to thrive. And so there were legendary recruitment efforts during all of those years.
And so when my father came on the scene in the 50s, and he'd been here and played here, he seemed to have embraced that Dixie spirit.
1953, 54, they were going to drop the school because the enrollment was down. So when I came, it might have only been a one-year deal, because the president said if we don't get enrollment. I told the president, I said, just let me have the school car and pay the gas and my hotel bills, and I'll just spend the whole summer. That's all I did.
But he was on a mission, and his mission was to recruit students for Dixie College. I remember sitting in that back seat, the four of us, the four little kids, traveled with him around the state of Utah recruiting football players and cheerleaders.
First got the job, I went to Kanab. They had 12 in the graduating class. I knocked on every door, both boys and girls. And I promised every boy they could play football, and every girl was going to be a cheerleader.
And you know, it's amazing the number of football players that ended up marrying some of those cheerleaders over the years. After 1 year, they doubled the enrollment, kept the school alive, and then from that point forward, he built a very successful football program.
I think, along with the town and the people that all worked to bring these players in, it hadn't been for the football team, where we had 50, 60 players on the team, when the school only had a little over 100 students in the student body, that I think football was one of the great determining factors in saving the school.
And that helped the college continue to grow as well, because that was a rallying point. Coming to this Sun Bowl, playing football games in this Sun Bowl, it was a rallying point for the whole community. And then during the fall, when they brought the rodeo in, they turned it into a red sandy turf. And so it was that way the rest of the football season. And I'd like to think that they did a really good job of cleaning up afterwards. I hope they did. I think they did.
The people who came together in each of those instances did it out of pride for their community and their school. They painted the giant Block D on the Black Ridge to the west. Over the past century, every year, students have gathered during D Week to give it a fresh coat of paint. The word Dixie was painted on the red bluff they called the Sugarloaf.
I attended Dixie High School, and if you earned a Sterling Scholar Award in your senior year, you were chosen and were eligible to be able to rappel off the Red Hill and paint the Dixie. I remember that so vividly, they almost had to push me off because I was so terrified. But once I got off the edge of that hill and I put my own white paint on that sign of Dixie, I felt so connected to it ever after that. And it's been such a great memory for me, and it's a tie to our community that so many of us experience.
It was that same spirit that allowed those first settlers to make it through. We're here in this Southland, we're isolated. We used to grow cotton. Now we're trying to grow really great people and educated people. That spirit that was at the center of all of that.